I've stated it pretty well clear, haven't I, friends? My patience, whether it come to a Jesse Puljujärvi trade, whether it come to the Oilers just in general making a trade, is pretty thin, right? We've been promised this big, massive trade. I've promised you this big, massive trade a million times over. And today, General Manager Ken Holland out doing the podcast and article tour pretty much saying, well, let's preach some patience and make sure that the fans, the media, and everybody involved in this whole Edmonton Oilers circus understands that unless it's the right deal at the right time, at the right strike of the clock, the Oilers will not make a trade to just make a trade. Friends, this is Dolynny TV. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the channel. Glad to have you along for another edition of Edmonton Oilers discussion here on the channel today. Of course, if you're new, I want you to consider one thing for me, alright? As this video goes along, consider sticking around here on Dolynny TV. We've just crossed 10,460 subscribers as of about 5 minutes before recording this video, and I'd love for you to be part of this crazy, no short word for it, community that we've been building here together on the channel. So appreciate everybody again that's tuned in over the past little bit as well. We've had a pretty good little successful return to action here after a week off, and I'm hoping this video does just as well. My friends, today, right, Ken Holland out there discussing things about the Oilers, the trade deadline, key ideas. I think there's a couple ones that I want to cover off in today's video, but number one is obviously patience, right? Patience, patience, patience. That's what we've been preached with Ken Holland since he came here. And I think perhaps, as he mentioned, that goes back to the 2020 NHL trade deadline. You may remember, if you've been a long-time viewer of the channel, I was on my buddy's couch in Crossfield sitting there covering the trade deadline, having a grand old time, and just really enjoying a great day off work. However, for the NHL, right, that was just 2 weeks before everything went south, and obviously not really turning out the way it wanted to in Ken Holland's mind for the Edmonton Oilers at the NHL trade deadline because of that. There's a lot of arguments you can make, there's a lot of conclusions you can draw, and there's a lot of results you could fudge from that NHL trade deadline if you are the Edmonton Oilers general manager Ken Holland. But the biggest takeaway you can get out of that 2020 trade deadline, if you're Ken Holland, is simply the need for patience, right? The Oilers gun up. They go 2 seconds for Athanasiou. They trade something for Ennis. They trade something for 2 games of Mike Green. And realistically, the most impactful player in that entire trade deadline ends up being Tyler Ennis. Again, look at the names on there. Athanasiou, Green, and Tyler Ennis, and your best guy is Tyler Ennis. He was having a pretty good year that year, but you gave up a lot of assets, you gave up a lot of situations to move in those players and didn't really get things the way you wanted to. By the way, the Oilers also traded Joel Persson to the Anaheim Ducks that year, if you remember that name. A guy like me, I remember that name pretty well. Anyway, that's kind of where they sat after that trade deadline. Did not pan out. So now moving forward, obviously the shortened year, Ken Holland pretty much brushed that one right off on the Got Your Back podcast today, but said, well, there wasn't really an opportunity to make moves. He did. He brought in Dmitry Kulikov, but again, another move that just, in terms of what us Oilers fans are looking for, doesn't move the needle. And this is another point that I'll make in a moment, but for us, Ken Holland's lessons learned over the past few years, right? Last year, bringing in Brett Kulak, which was a phenomenal move. I think that's the best deadline move the Oilers have had in the years that Ken Holland's been here. And oh, by the way, as well, how about Derek Brassard that didn't pan out? But you look at the assets in, assets out, and everything the Oilers involved to make this team better year in, year out at the trade deadline, is that Ken Holland, to make that good move, right, is it seemed risky when we traded that second and William Lagesson for Brett Kulak, but the guy was, at a time, your step-up defender in lieu of Darnell Nurse being injured, Duncan Keith logging a lot of minutes, but there were a lot of games that it wasn't Duncan Keith who was your number one D-man. I felt at times that Brett Kulak was shouldering a heavy load out there in the playoffs, and very deservedly so, got the contract to stay with the Oilers. And all of a sudden, this past 2 weeks where he's out there scrapping guys and just having a good old time on the ice, hey, I love the guy even that much more. But that's where it's like, that's a move that still us fans felt there was risk to, right? And obviously, as a William Lagesson fan too, kind of sucked to see him go, but I don't even know where he is at this point, so maybe not the worst thing in the world. But when it comes down to it for the Oilers, you look at this from a whole lens picture. Is Brett Kulak's your best trade so far, and Athanasiou far and above your worst trade? So now, what do you come take out of this? And you know what I said, that trade would be still a win for the Oilers, and I think that Athanasiou trade, with the hindsight 2020 and the long view now in the immediate future, is that trade is a win for Ken Holland in one scenario. And this might be myself trying to not take as much heat on that video, still 2 years removed. But what it's a win for the Oilers is Athanasiou's trade and that trade deadline in 2020 teaches the Oilers a lot to be patient, make that right move when it's made to be there, right? And that's the best part about it, is you made a bad move, but you got a very good learning opportunity out of it as general manager Ken Holland. So that's where we sit now going into this 2023 trade deadline. You go back to this Jesse Puljujarvi trade discussion. You go back to the fact that, yeah, I'm sick and tired of hearing of it. Just make it happen. There's apparently a deal in place. We've heard that one for the last week. Kyler Yamamoto comes off the LTIR in about a week's or less than a week's time on Sunday. And you know what? If good things take time, and that's the message Ken Holland is sending to Oilers fans, you know what? I actually might not mind that at all. I might be able to take that just with a grain of salt, obviously knowing that, hey, I don't want to miss out on anything, and if we miss out on something because of patience, then I'm going to be upset. But what I really want to take out of that and just take in is the fact that he's not looking for that immediate fix. He's looking for that perfect fix at the perfect time, because he senses it's going to be available somewhere on the market this year. That's the beautiful part of this as Oilers fans, is we're going to have a chance to see that perfect move more than likely happen for the Oilers this year. Ken Holland's been here, done this long enough that he's ready and committed to make that perfect move when it needs to happen. And that's the truly exciting part about this NHL trade deadline this year, is all the lessons learned from the past 4 years now bleeds into this season trade deadline, right? It's 3 years prior and this year's half season so far, and Ken Holland is ready to bleed it all together to make sure we get the best deadline outcome possible. Because just because you make a trade deadline acquisition that's good doesn't mean you win the cup, and just because you win the President's Trophy doesn't mean you win the cup either. So there's something to be said for, you want to build players that are going to help you win, not players that look good on paper. Friends, I'm Tyson. This is Dolynny TV. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm headed to the bar for wings tonight, so please, if you're out enjoy responsibly and make sure you get home safe. And we'll talk either later tonight or tomorrow. And it's been my pleasure having you along this afternoon. I'm up on out of here.